media runs these fake push polls to generate their narratives, to generate false perceptions of reality. You know, and I love it because then Saturday rolls around and here's Trump and Elon, and they're walking into the UFC, and everybody's cheering, and everybody's like on their feet for him, and Mel Gibson saluting from the front row, and you're like, wait a minute. The people still like the guy. This is not a situation where there's this like massive outcry against Trump the way that the media would have you believe. But that being said, Rich, we do need to understand and tell the truth about what's going on. And we know, of course, that President Trump, when it comes down to it, has been making some very big changes and talking about even bigger changes. We know this has spooked the market the way that this always happens, particularly on the economy. And that's why on this issue, I did want to drill in, Rich. What are you seeing in those numbers when it comes down to it? Because look, these for better or worse, you know, personally, I think that America has invested too much in the stock market. I think this is something that ultimately perhaps has gotten too much exposure to the average American. This is like a casino culture, and yet suddenly we're told this is the best way to expand our money, because of course this is the way we've set ourselves up financially. I don't usually pop off on this, but I guess I just am. So that being said, though, that is where a lot of people have their money. So, Rich, what are you seeing on the economic front?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to me, Jack, in the period of, let's call it globalization, when they changed the economy from a goods-producing economy to a primarily service sector reliant market-based economy. And I don't mean markets the way people think. I mean stock market obsessed based economy. They've collapsed it no less than 2 times in order to change the economy into a cheap goods, no manufacturing, no living wage economy. It was going to take disruption to be able to change it back, which is the agenda that people did vote for. And so I just want people to understand, I'm not saying here that there's not economic concern. And for those who watch my show, everyone knows for weeks I've been very critical of the White House's messaging because I think they're reactive instead of being proactive, and they're not speaking in the terms that I think they should be speaking in or think would be effective. All right, so I'm not absent criticism, but the truth is, it is the narrative
reality.
You're hearing right now about
that we live in right
the
now.
economy
and
and
we do
everything
have to live in reality. We're not the left.
That's right. I mean, it's being pushed by people who were never honest to begin with, right? And what I really see is a similar situation to what happened with Reagan when he was elected in, of course, the 1980 election. He was hammered from the day he took office in 81 after those tax cuts and the reforms that he pushed. He was hammered all the way up until 83 when the economy started to turn around. He needed to implement a little bit of pain in order to fix what the Carter and others, it wasn't just Jimmy Carter, but in order to get the country back in the right direction, he needed to implement some pretty big changes. And it wasn't the benefits were not immediate. It hurt and people were concerned. I just think that everything needs to be put in its proper context. Most of the concern right now is not being driven by the reality of higher prices. It's being driven by the perception that there will be higher prices, and it's being driven by a certain group's perception. All right. It is not a bad thing. You just mentioned the UFC. It is not a bad thing to be the party of younger, less white people. Okay, it is not a bad thing to be the party of people maybe who now vote at lower rates, but in the future are the growing demographics of this country. You're reacting to negative sentiment that is being put out and being exacerbated because these people take polls, but particularly older voters who don't really care about what the economy will look like 10 years from now, Jack. They care about what they had saved up for their golden years right now, and they care about whether or not Social Security will be enough. I cannot tell you when we poll how many times I hear from, let's just call it 60 and above, how many times we will hear in a single polling session, Elon Musk is going to take my Social Security. Okay, I mean, I cannot tell you how many times we hear something like that. That is what is
and so much of that, by the way, comes from what you hear. You hear Democrats say this, and it is broadcast media and cable media just regurgitate it. They just Elon's never said anything about that.
Of course not.
Actually spoken out against it so many times. President Trump has been against it, but they know that's the button to press for those voters. It doesn't matter how many times President Trump has said it's a lie; they will just lie.
That's right, and you need to expect that. Look at what I'm saying is here. Don't miss the forest through the trees. Step back and look at the bigger picture. All right. I mean, if you course correct now, if you're the Trump administration, and you think you're course correcting, and you change course now and try to go back to business as usual, you're gonna forsake all of the. All right, and it's time. I really don't know how else to say this. The president's a bigger thinker guy. You have to look past your own presidency and agenda right now. And if you want your legacy to survive, you're going to need these voters to keep voting for people who have the same letter after your name on the ballot in subsequent elections. In the present short term, all right, let's say present to like short term future, it is going to be a little bit tough at the ballot box during special elections, et cetera, et cetera. But the younger generation is basically the most conservative generation we've seen in 50 years. I don't know what. I don't know
Rich,
why.
we've been talking about this.
Like,
we've been talking about this on the show
House seats,
all
Jack,
week.
To have a Roosevelt coalition for 30 years.
It is the you now have this situation where millennials and Gen Y are the most right-wing generation in America by almost 10 points, according to Real Clear Politics. Almost 10 points. So, yes, we've seen the 70 plus have like a negative 14 deficit, but it's blowing. And by the way, you're not going to see this headline anywhere. I want to say, like, outside of me and you and like Charlie Kirk, no one is talking about this, that it's millennials. Remember the millennials, the stupid, lazy millennials who can't do anything, can't do anything right, who are ruining America. Guess what? They are the ones who realize that the system doesn't work for them, and they love that Trump is fighting the system. That's what people elected Trump to do. These are the ones who, and I'm not going to relitigate the whole thing, but they like the change versus what you're talking about, the people at the other end of the age spectrum. And it is economic. A lot of this is economic driven, folks. Correction. All of this is economic driven, that they're the ones this system has worked for, and that's why they don't like the changes. So what President Trump is doing is saying, look, we're going to do the best to take care of everybody, but the generation that's coming up right now, they need change, and that's what they voted for.
And I would say this too, even that number that you just flashed on the screen is exaggerated because I mean, I don't want to go through this, but we've talked about this a lot. Going in, I told you he was not going to perform as poorly with seniors as the poll suggested going to the election. There are myriad reasons for this that we have discussed. Polls are very bad. The younger people are underrepresented, by the way, in those surveys, and the older people are overrepresented and not even polled correctly. All right, let me just the sample sizes alone. I can tell I already know the answer to this question, but. You do any post-stratification? You do any multi-level regression? You did not. Your sample is not big enough. When we do, and this is why people should go to the Public Polling Project, support the Public Polling Project. Yes, that is a pitch. Go to Big Data Poll and do it. This is why we break down age details the way we do and why we stress that in this day and age, bigger is better. All right, bottom line, you need much larger samples. And the reason and look at what Ann Seltzer did in Iowa. She was a perfect example of this. She completely mispolled the senior vote. Their samples are not big enough to even do that level of analysis or that granular level of weighting because they're not breaking up the 50 to 64s, the 65 to 74s, the 75 pluses. Laura hates it when I get into detail like this on shows because she thinks I'm telling other pollsters who are bad at their job secrets that they should figure out on their own, and she's probably right, but it's true. They do not have representative or large enough samples for each of these subgroups to do the level of weighting that is necessary to see whether or not you are accurately polling these age groups.